Testament book of Exodus is part of the story of the Israelites' journey from slavery to freedom. There were times in that journey when people wanted to go back to Egypt, and they gave up on God. In today's reading, the Israelites are camped at Mount Sinai. Moses goes up the mountain to meet with God. This is when God gives Moses the 10 Commandments, which begins with God saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me, nor shall you make an idol to worship. So that's what's happening up on the mountain. Listen to what's happening down in the valley while that's going on. I'm reading from Exodus 32, verses 1 through 8. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered around Aaron and said to him, Come, make gods for us, who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him. Aaron said to them, Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. So all the people took off the gold rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. He took the gold from them, formed it in a mold, and cast an image of a calf. And said, These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. When Aaron saw the people said, These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made proclamation and said, Tomorrow shall be a festival to the Lord. They rose early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to revel. The Lord said to Moses, Go down at once. Your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, have acted perversely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I commanded them. They have cast for themselves an image of a calf and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. A word of God that is still speaking. Thanks be to God. So what do you do when God ghosts you? You pray, you hope, you believe all the promises you read in the Bible, you believe the promises your parents told you and your grandparents and the pastor preached about, but when you need God most, God ghosts you, God doesn't show up. So you make your own God. If the God of your ancestors doesn't appear, no problem. Just melt down some gold and make your own God. A golden calf, money in the bank, science, or a real live flesh and blood person on whom you can place like a boulder all of your hopes. In those early days of wandering in the wilderness, Moses was the go-between between God and the Israelites. They've camped by Mount Sinai. Moses goes up the mountain to meet with God, and now Moses is AWOL. He's been up that mountain a very, very long time. They had no way of knowing if he was dead or alive. But either way, Moses was now as invisible to them as God. So, what else do? You find another God to pin your hopes to. Aaron quickly gathers all the jewelry he could. He makes a golden calf, and then they all proclaim, Behold your God who freed you from slavery in Egypt. We would like to think we would never do that. But in the spirit of our Faith and Politics series we're in the middle of, do you remember when Barack Obama was running for president, what Oprah Winfrey famously said about him? He was the one. There are those today who call Donald Trump God's Messiah. I will just say Barack Obama was not the one. Donald Trump isn't God's Messiah. We already have one. But both of those two people, by articulating the pain and awakening the hopes of those who felt invisible, they raised the hopes of those for whom government wasn't working. The ones who might find themselves saying, Where's Moses and where's God when everything is falling down around me? I think we can all identify with that desire to find some concrete thing or person to put our hope on, some visible manifestation of God at work in this world when things aren't going well. But we don't often find that in an obvious way. We look at what's going on in the world and we do wonder where God is. For example, if Israel is God's chosen people, where's the signs that God is fighting for Israel when those bombs are flying in from Lebanon in the middle of the night? On the flip side, if God really is for the oppressed, then why doesn't God stop Israel's indiscriminate bombing in Gaza? You can look at it both ways. And there's so many other things going on in our world that we're looking at and we're wondering, where is God and what is God doing? And not seeing obvious signs of God at work. And so we get anxious, we get worried, we get afraid. And when we get anxious and worried and afraid, it's not unheard of to tether your hopes to a candidate or a policy or a party that says what you need to hear. But that candidate can never ultimately fulfill your hopes because they are only human, just like you and me. Anithia Portier-Young, she's an Old Testament professor at Duke University, defines an idol as something that pleases our senses. The next one's the important one, mollifies our anxiety, and invites admiration from our neighbors. Our idols help us hold our anxiety in check in an uncertain world. Moses is up on the mountain, nowhere to be seen. We're in the middle of the wilderness. We have no clue how to address the challenges of the wilderness or where to go. Let's make an idol. Let's make something to hold our anxiety in check. They give us something or someone to hold on to and to turn to save our world. But think about this. If an idol can be created, an idol can be destroyed too. And if our idols, the ones we put all of our anxiety and all our hope on, die, then doesn't our hope die too? So we have to defend our idols against all attackers. And we create this almost mystical aura around them and make them invincible. Even though deep down we know no idol, no person, no candidate can ever fulfill all of our hopes, we become deeply invested in defending our idols, even to the point of losing some of the most important people in our lives. We have made idols out of our politics. Both sides. Maybe I should say all sides. There's more than two. And it has cost us dearly. Our society is incredibly divided, and some of us, our families, are incredibly divided. But when we become so deeply invested in defending our idols, the chasm between us and them becomes wider and wider until there's really no place left to stand than at the extremes. There is no middle anymore. And we find ourselves defending our side as if the very power of God depended on it. Do you know how to know if you've reached that point of worshiping an idol? When you feel like you have to defend it. Because the God who created heaven and earth, who put life into our bodies, doesn't need anybody to defend that God. Our idols need defense. God does not. I think what's happening is we are so afraid of what will happen if our idol falls that we reach the point where we will do and believe anything to keep it on its pedestal, and we become almost a slave to its preservation. All of our energy gets poured into preserving our idols rather than living free. We forget that the whole story of our relationship with God is a story from slavery and fear to freedom and promise. We forget that we were called to be free and not slaves. And yet, we've become slaves to our political idols. I would say that our choice this election season is not between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. I don't care whose name is on the ticket. Our choice is between freedom and slavery. Freedom to live joyfully and compassionately, or slavery to preserving something or someone who could never live up to our hopes. Freedom to be kind when the world says we should hate, or slavery to looking down on everyone who disagrees with us. Freedom to move into a future with confidence, knowing that God meets us there, or slavery to a past that cannot be anymore. That's the choice that we face, no matter whose name is on the ballot. Will we choose freedom and joy, or slavery and anxiety? The Israelites chose slavery. They expected, they wanted, they needed God to be out front, leading the way, swinging the sword, clearing the path for them to enter the promised land. And that's not what God did for them. God did provide fire and cloud to guide them by day and by night, but God's way was to go with them to face those challenges together, to strengthen them for what lay ahead, not to shield them from all the challenges of the wilderness and conquest. God wasn't AWOL. It's just that God didn't show up the way they wanted God to. And it was because they wanted a God who would do their bidding, who would do what they wanted, that they asked Aaron to make an idol for them. Did you catch what the idol was made out of? Of course, there's a reason we call it a golden calf, but do you know where the gold came from? Do you remember the story? It was the gold they took, I think I heard something back here, yeah, it was the gold they took from the Egyptians when they left Egypt, when they escaped from slavery. The idol was made out of the plunder from their past. The idol represented their past, not the future God was leading them toward. That gold represented the slavery God freed them from, not the freedom God was leading them to. Idols tie us to the past. They call up a long ago memory of a golden age, which was never as golden as we remember, and it certainly wasn't golden for everybody. But they call up a memory of a day when, at least in our imaginations, everything was better. And then we place our hope in these idols to restore that past glory. But what they really do is they trap us in the past. They keep us looking backwards. But we worship a God who looks forward and who leads us forward to a promised land, a place we have not been to before. God doesn't worship the past like we do. As the prophet Isaiah reminds us, God is constantly doing something new, something bold, something life-giving. And that's where our hope lies, in the God who promises us something better than our past. But when we can't see that, or when our anxiety about what we do see is so high, it's hard to imagine that such a future is really possible. And when our anxiety gets the best of us, we don't always follow the most life-giving path. We don't always make the most faithful decisions. And sometimes we confuse our idols with God. Remember, I don't know who any of you are voting for. Your chosen candidate is not God. Don't vote for them because you think they will fulfill all of your hopes. They can't, and how unfair of us to put the burden of all of our hopes on another human being. They can't do it. But instead, be guided by the fruits of the Spirit. Because if you want to know at least what direction God is going, find the people who are living out the fruits of the Spirit, because they're going to be showing us where God is at work. If God came to set us free to live with love and joy and peace and kindness, look for people who show those fruits in their own lives. Look for the ones who show the fruits of the Spirit in their talk and in their walk and in their decisions. The ones who let love guide their actions, who prioritize kindness, who lift others up, who put their thoughts and prayers into action, because they are like Moses. They are not perfect, but they are a sign that God is with us on that journey. Be cautious of what Paul says are the fruits of the works of the flesh. And he has quite a long list. Envy, strife, fornication, quarrels, dissensions, and a whole bunch more. Did you notice in that list was idolatry? I wonder if it's not uncommon for people who thrive on things like conflict and jealousy to worship their own image of themselves or their own ideology. Remember, they are not God. We may do that for ourselves sometimes too. We might need to remind ourselves, we are not God. But remember also that, as Paul said, the works of the flesh are opposed to the works of the Spirit. The works of the flesh are focused on oneself. The works of the Spirit are focused on others. So look for those who show the work of the Spirit in their lives: love, humility, generosity, and kindness. Matthew 25 is one of our guiding scriptures for what a life lived in the Spirit looks like. Feeding the hungry and housing the homeless, caring for the sick and the elderly, welcoming the stranger among us, working to restore lives. As Jesus said, if you're doing that to the least of those among you, you're doing that for Him. So as we evaluate who gets our loyalty, not just in this election, but in any of the upcoming ones, look for those who are trying to live a Matthew 25 life, because they are signposts that God is active. They are showing us a way forward to a future filled with hope. So support those who are joining God in that holy work. Be gentle with them too. No one is perfect, and no one is going to do it perfectly. But remember, they are not God. Don't put the burden of your hopes on them. Only God is God. And only God is worthy of your worship and ultimate loyalty. Our job, as we look at the big and important decisions we have to make in our lives, whether you're talking politics or your own family or your own career, whatever it may be, our responsibility is to follow the Spirit, to do the work of the Spirit, because not only will that help pull us out of the anxiety that may be keeping us trapped in slavery, it'll give hope to others, because by living by the Spirit, by showing the fruits of the Spirit, we are going to show people who might be more anxious and afraid than we are that there is another way, that there is a path to a better future than what we have seen in the past. And ultimately, that is all of our roles, to in a way be Moses for others, to show people by our lives that God is active, God is present, no matter what is going on around us. Amen.